being alongside on the journey with some incredible founders like Jack Ma or Christo and Tavid at Wise, just the commitment and the self-belief, and Richard Branson, similarly, just the courage of their conviction to what they believe was possible. 99% of people said you're never going to be successful. And so I've taken that forward in my own business and building Mosaic.
Tell us a little bit more about what you guys are doing at Mosaic.
We want to build a firm that's just focused on serving entrepreneurs at early stage. Founders need a good partner who's very hands-on and helping them build out their team, develop the go-to-market motion.
Can you walk us through some of the AI waves that have come?
The first wave that we really engaged in was in 2013-14, post-ImageNet competition, which was this big computer vision researcher competition. That led to this first wave of computer vision applications like autonomous vehicles. 2014 to 17, there were some breakthroughs in the research around recurrent neural networks that helped to improve the performance on natural language processing tasks.
In terms of the current wave that's going on, do you feel like there is something different about this specific wave?
The cost and the time to actually train these models was significantly higher. Now with this new transformer architecture, how quickly you can train a model and deliver value.
Where do you stand on regulation of AI?
I am very cautious about regulation. It shows up usually often too late. It's probably too late now, and they make all the wrong decisions. The technology is still so early in its development that you want to be careful not to constrain what's possible by starting to put constraints on it. Hi everyone, my name is Toby Coppel. I am a co-founder and partner at Mosaic Ventures, and you're listening to the Innovation Civilization podcast.
This is the Innovation Civilization podcast, and my name is Wahid. As you know, we're at a very unique moment when it comes to AI and how we look at the evolution and investing in it. But in order to understand this space better, I wanted to sit with someone who's overseen multiple waves of AI before, all the way from starting his career in Silicon Valley 25 years ago with the Netscape days and the Yahoo days and the activity of the 2015s and 14s with AI, all the way to now, and he's actively investing in this space as well with Mosaic Ventures. With Toby, we get quite deep into AI, LLMs, and the future of it. So stay tuned and enjoy the show. All right, Toby, thank you so much for being on the Innovation Civilization podcast. What a great pleasure to have you here today.
Thanks for having me, Wahid.
Brilliant. All right, let's get right to it then, Toby. So, I think we connected over an article on LinkedIn that you wrote on AI. Before we get to that, I was just, checking through your background. It seems like you've got a very eclectic career in tech, all the way beginning in like Netscape, AOL eras. So tell us a little bit more about yourself, like who you are, what you do, and how you got into venture.
Sure. Thank you for having me. First of all, it's a privilege to be on the show.
Pleasure.
I have been working in the tech industry since the early days of my career. It's sort of the gift that keeps on giving, as I say to my kids. I managed to stumble upon CompuServe and worked in their IPO in 1994. And that's where I opened my eyes to what was sort of pre-internet online services. And then I moved to the US for graduate school, and it was sort of the beginning of really the internet, the Netscape IPO, and I went west, as they said, young man go west. I did, and pursued my dreams, and was very fortunate to be able to participate in the first wave of the dot-com space, and made a number of early stage investments starting in 95, 96, worked with Intel Capital and worked with a firm called Allen Company. And it was just sort of the right place at the right time. And I had a really front row seat into sort of the development of the internet.
Incredible. And after that, you sort of came over across the Atlantic and started here?
Yeah, I spent, after the crash, I joined Yahoo. It was part of the new management team, and I was the chief strategy officer for Yahoo. So, I led $5 billion worth of investments and acquisitions at Yahoo. And the most notable of which I'm very proud of, is my team. We invested $1 billion into Alibaba in 2005, and we returned $80 billion back to Yahoo shareholders. So,
that's incredible.
And it's one of the highlights. But yes, I moved back to Europe to bring up my family, and I ran Yahoo's business in Europe for a few years. And then I joined Richard Branson and his family office to invest again in startups.
All right.
And I was again fortunate to work at that time with companies like TransferWise. I was a very early investor there, and with Pinterest and a company called Criteo, a French ad tech company.
That's
And
incredible.
so it's been an exciting, fortunate career to work with so many incredible founders like Jerry Yang and David Fowler at Yahoo and Jack Ma at
Yeah.
Alibaba and many others.
That's incredible. So you've
Yeah.
been quite around the block basically in the last 25 years. I was wondering, like, and you mentioned about Jerry Yang and Jack Ma as well, and Richard Branson that you work with. I was wondering, like, just out of curiosity, who were some of your key influences or mentors in your kind of career, and how that sort of shaped how you think about technology and business today?
Sure, it's a great question. I've been blessed with actually a number of mentors over the years.
Mhm.
I'd say that Jerry Yang is certainly one of the key
Mhm.
people who influenced me. We're still very close, friends.
Mhm.
He's always been an incredible visionary. I mean, he's much more of a sort of a product thinker, a
Mhm.
very long term kind of orientation in terms of how he sees the world and sort of strategically what's coming next. And he's also post Yahoo been an investor and has had some incredible success with his investors. He's been truly visionary as an
Mhm.
investor as much as he was as a founder. I also, was very fortunate to work with Terry Semel, who was the CEO of Yahoo during that period, and who I learned a lot from about building businesses and creating value in businesses and making investment decisions. And he was incredible
Mhm.
um, to me and took me under his wing and taught me so much. And I've had some other great people in my life, Herb Allen, his
Mhm.
family, Allen and Company, and learned how to build relationships with founders and entrepreneurs with him and his team
Mhm.
was amazing. And yes, being alongside on the journey with some incredible founders like Jack Ma or Christo and Tavat at Wise, just the commitment and the self belief, and Richard Branson similarly, just the courage of their conviction to what they believe was possible when most people, 99% of people said you're never going to be successful. And so, I've taken that forward in my own business and building Mosaic and building our firm
Mhm.
and trying to carve out a niche in the market.
That's incredible. That's quite incredible. Um, Kind of working with so many great people in one lifetime. So let's talk about Mosaic, really. So tell us a little bit more about what you guys are doing at Mosaic. What's your kind of fun thesis, and yeah, how long you guys been around?
Sure. So we started a little bit less than 10 years ago.
Mhm.
And, having spent a lot of my career in Silicon Valley
Yeah.
and the opportunity to see, the amount of incredible startup formation and development and growth there. Europe's always lagged behind historically. And, I'd seen a lot of very positive developments in the market in Europe and
Hmm.
sort of had built belief that things were really changing. This was back in 2012, 2013. And you could see sort of some of the first
Hmm.
signs of that with some companies getting to some real scale. I mean, you had companies like Skype that had sort of built a brand and a name for themselves, but we hadn't had as
Hmm.
many large scale outcomes. And I think we could just start seeing that in that
Hmm.
period and looking at all the private companies at that point that were starting to growing, getting traction. And so we said that we want to build a firm that's just focused on serving entrepreneurs at early stage.
In
There's lots
Europe,
of
yeah.
fantastic in Europe.
Oh,
We
okay.
felt like lots of great multi-stage firms,
Hmm.
but as a founder, particularly at Series A, where we believe founders need a good partner who's going to be with them,
Hmm.
rolling up their sleeves, very hands-on, and helping them build out their team,
Hmm.
develop the go-to-market motion, and help them execute against that.
Hmm.
That's something that founders we believe need, and there just wasn't as much of that available in the market. There were some good seed firms and lots of angel investors. Those folks tend to be less actively engaged just because the nature of the
Yeah.
quite large portfolios. And Series A, we just think is a key moment for a company to really have
Hmm.
put in the right foundations in terms of building out the team. And so that's what we wanted to do. We didn't want to do too many things. We just love working with founders. We didn't have a desire to build a huge investment firm. We wanted
Yeah.
to be very boutique, very partner led. So we don't have a lot of other younger folks on the
Mm.
on the team. It's really the founders get us and our 20 plus years of experience to help them
Mm.
day in, day out, and that's what we like to do.
Mm.
And it's such a privilege, to be able to
Yeah,
every day meet with lots of founders and work with them.
that's incredible. So just to clarify, so you guys do just Series A or seed and Series A?
We do, I would call late seed stage
Late
and
seeds.
Series A,
Okay.
where we tend to, I think what we're best at, we think, is when there's a product, sort of touch and feel
Yeah, yeah,
and
yeah.
use and talk to some
Sure.
early customers and see
Mm.
what their feedback is in the product, to be able to think about the business model
Okay.
and the market. I think that's where we do best. We're not investing at classic seed where I
Mm.
think you're betting a lot on people,
Yeah.
and it's very, very early. So
Mhm.
that's really where we fit in. We're writing $1 to $10 million checks, but sort of most of our
Yeah.
where we sort of probably $4 to $8 million at
Okay.
sort of Series A.
Okay. Okay. And you consider yourselves as very active sort of investors in the cap table, yeah?
Look, of course, the founders run the businesses; they make all the decisions. We're
Yeah.
there as a business partner, try to be a good sounding board. But yes, we serve on almost all the boards of our companies. We're either the lead or the co-lead investor.
Mhm.
We think of Series A as we call it a full contact sport. I mean,
Mm.
it truly does require the time and dedication. So,
Mm.
I'll typically only make a couple of investments a year, and so I have a lot of time to spend with those teams to help them in that sort of first 12, 24 months sort of post investment. And
Yeah.
we've, as a firm, we've been very heavily focused on machine learning
Yeah.
applications. So we
Yeah.
started investing in machine learning in 2016, and it's sort of more than half of our portfolio. And so we were very thematic in terms of how we invest as well.
Yeah.
We tend to be very kind of prepared mind. We do a lot of our own research and thesis development and to map the market and really reach out to a lot of companies that we think fit with what we're looking for.
That's pretty cool, actually. I mean, you kind of expected and predicted the next question, really. But in terms of like AI, so I mean, there's obviously lots of stuff going on out there when it comes to AI and specifically Gen AI right now. I also noticed you've got Mustafa Suleiman's book, at the background, The Coming Wave. So, and you've seen like a few of these AI waves, right? Both as an operator, but also as an investor, right? So, like, can you walk us through some of the AI sort of waves, quote unquote, that have come? And yeah, like, does this feel like another one of them, I guess? Yeah.
Absolutely. So look, I think depending on who you ask, I'm not an expert in the
Yeah.
entire history of artificial intelligence. I think a lot of people would trace it back to the 60s, the early 60s,
Yeah.
when some of the breakthrough research was. I think others may even argue that it was in sort of late 40s.
Yeah.
But in terms of my career, my lifetime, I've been active, and we've been active since Mosaic started, since sort of 2014. And the first wave that we really engaged in was in sort of 2013, 14, when post sort of the ImageNet competition, which was this big computer vision researcher competition where effectively people figured out how to recognize cats in pictures at its most basic level.
Cat, not cat.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. So that led to this first, wave of computer vision applications like autonomous vehicles. And, we have an investment in a autonomous drone software company called Alterion that sort of came out of some of that work.
Yeah.
We also invested in identity verification, so using algorithms to figure out are you who you say you are, rather than having someone examining a photograph of you in a PDF that they receive by email and get back to you 3 days later. Or, there's obviously healthcare imaging. There's a really interesting application that sort of became important back then. So that was sort of the first wave. And then I'd say 2014 to 17, probably, there were some breakthroughs in the research around recurrent neural networks that helped to improve the performance on natural language processing tasks. So we did see a sort of explosion of these chatbots back then and some other NLP applications. And there was definitely a lot of hype, and Facebook released their chatbot, if you remember back then. I think they pulled back from the market immediately. Microsoft did the same. And we made a number of investments in more enterprise NLP, including customer service, in procurement and another one in document processing. So that
Hmm.
was sort of the second wave that we've been involved in. And then, the attention is all you need paper was published in 2017. I don't think anyone recognized the significance of it quite back
Yeah.
then, but that was done by several Google researchers
Mm.
that introduced the transformer architecture that really underpins this new wave of LLMs, which sort of
Yeah.
following the kind of launch of ChatGPT in sort of November
Yeah.
22,
Yeah. Yeah.
led to a lot of new things. Yeah.
Yeah, I was just kind of, just for the audience themselves, like I was trying to see around, okay, what kind of diagram, like, maybe pictures the space perfectly. And I think there is a good effort basically done by folks at Murek here.
Uh-huh.
Like you've got the artificial intelligence, then you've got machine learning, and then deep learning. And you talked about NLP there, right? And just between NLP and LLM, where the current wave is basically going on, is that intersection between like NLP and deep learning, basically. And you've got that conversational AI there as well. So
Sure.
do you think this is a good
Absolutely.
sort of representation in terms of
Yeah,
how
look, I
far?
think
Yeah,
we could always debate exactly where these things overlap, but yes, for
yeah,
sure, this is a great.
yeah,
I
yeah,
mean,
yeah.
there's a number of other technologies too, but this is a great summary. Yes.
Yeah, yeah, that's pretty cool, actually. And in terms of like the current wave that's going on, and basically like very LLM kind of based, right? Um, do you feel like there is something different about this specific wave compared to the ImageNet stuff you talked about, the early NLP investments you talked about in the 16, 17s? Do you feel like something's changed or different compared to those, or?
But, what it required to train a model back
Yeah.
in 2014, 15 was a huge amount of work, uh,
Hmm.
real work. I mean, you not only needed to aggregate a lot of structured data. I mean, you could take unstructured data, but then the labeling of that data required often,
Yeah.
sending that to a crowd, often in Southeast Asia, that then would label all these images. So it was a very
Mm.
manual
Yeah.
task that would take, quite a lot of expense involved to
Hmm.
then train the models, then get more feedback,
Hmm.
then retrain them with some updated labels and images. So the cost and the time to actually train these models was significantly higher. So,
Hmm.
like you could have we had companies that were spending $5-10 million
Yeah.
just to do that element of it, and not even we're not even talking about the compute. We're just talking about
Mm.
purely
Mm.
the data aggregation, data labeling piece of it.
Mm.
And now you can train these models on a single shot. They don't need a lot of metadata. I mean, it's
Mm.
incredible now with this new transformer architecture, how quickly you can train a model and deliver value. So it's
Mm.
completely transformative, and you can obviously now you don't even potentially need to train at all. You literally just take off the shelf, connect to Anthropic, Claude,
Mhm.
or GPT-4
Yeah.
Go, or which model of your choice through an API, and you can just you know point that at your particular
Mhm.
problem set. You can obviously fine tune if you want, taking someone else's model, but it's a completely different. It's a little bit like
Mm.
in the 90s, when I was funding startups at Intel Capital, we had a company that started would have to literally go out and buy a Sun microsystem server.
Yeah.
They would then, which was expensive. It's like,
Yeah.
$250,000. Then they go buy an Oracle database, another $250,000. I mean, you buy all
Yeah.
this
Yeah.
stuff, you stick it on a rack in
CapEx is
your
very
office.
high. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, so the fixed cost of getting into business was
Yeah.
enormous. And the beauty of this, literally you can get up and running
Mm.
in a heartbeat. Now, the downside as an investor in that is that everyone can do that, and so the entry costs
Mm.
are lower, and therefore you're going to have a lot more competition.
Mhm.
So, as I think I'm sure we're going to get on to talk
Yeah.
about how do you build a moat, how do you build
Yeah.
defensibility, how do you build value in your where is the value in your product?
Yeah. Yeah. For sure.
Um,
For sure. And I think that AWS sort of moment and switch to cloud computing, it was like
sure.
quite a big moment, right? It brought down the cost and the seat checks as well becoming smaller, like you said, compared to before. But then you've got quite a bit of competition. For me, I think the other thing you mentioned about the training and how faster and automated the training is, which is why these LLM capabilities is much easier. But also for me, I think the most interesting moment was that like these sort of ML, these sort of NLP stuff has always been there. But I think the moment that OpenAI actually put a user interface to that, and like millions of people could actually access that and interact with that sort of language model, I think that sort of unleashed is sort of a different kind of thing. Like this is real, like at least in the consumer perspective, like this is so real and we can sort of interact with it. Um, so that I feel like is a little bit different from compared to before, where these ML and NLP firms were just cracking on in a very specific kind of use case, right?
I think from the zeitgeist perspective, it
Mm.
became into the popular
Yeah.
wave, became a wave very quickly. I think partly because like the user interface they created,
Mm.
it like the fact that it starts to you see it kind of responding, and you see
Yeah.
the lines of letters and words. Like it almost feels a little human
Yeah.
that it's generating stuff on the fly. Whereas it knows the answer, it could just give you the whole thing, but it
Yeah.
doesn't. It actually gives it to you
Mm.
slowly, so you can read it. A bunch of other touches like that they implemented in the UI. It just felt a little human, a little
Yeah.
okay. I can interact with this thing, and yeah, absolutely. People are okay. Wow. Now I do think that we'll get on and talk about this, but the fact that it's an empty search box. In theory, you could do anything,
Mm-hmm.
but when you actually try to figure out what you can actually use it for, that's useful to you, that's when
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
rubber
Yeah.
hits the road. And I think that's
For
where
sure.
there are a lot of challenges in the industry because it isn't as simple as that. It can't do everything, and even though it seems very unconstrained,
Yeah.
there's still a lot of limitations in the technology that need to get resolved.
Yeah. 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 Absolutely. We'll come to kind of applications of it in a bit. So, one high level question before we kind of deep dive into some of the more interesting stuff there. If you were to kind of, how do you categorize this current AI investment landscape? So do you see this as like, okay, there's a hardware layer, foundational models, tooling, and then applications, or like how are you guys sort of seeing it and where are you guys sort of playing right now within that?
Sure. So I think we can spend a lot of time on this.
Mm.
There are different parts of the stack here, like there is in any
Mm.
software category. So
Yeah,
obviously there's the silicon layer, which we didn't talk about, where certainly I'm pretty convinced
mm.
NVIDIA and the cloud providers are likely to win.
I see.
You have full stack foundation models that can do text, image, voice, video, code, 3D, etc. Those we think you're going to need 5, 10, $20 billion to compete and win in. So
Mm.
don't think that's a venture scale.
Mm.
It's just it's a race for scale in that area.
Mm.
We can talk about the role of open source there, and I think that's
Yeah,
very, very interesting. In terms of like the other infrastructure around the models, like whether it's the ML frameworks or
yeah.
training and fine tuning, monitoring, observability,
Mm.
storage, like vector databases, data labeling, processing,
Yeah.
compliance. There's a lot of interesting opportunities there. We have a lot of questions as to whether those are truly venture markets. If you look
Interesting.
back at the previous generation of ML ops,
Mm-hmm.
very few companies succeeded to build enough value on top of the hyperscalers, because the
Interesting.
hyperscalers often offer their own version of a product. It may have not been the best product in the market, but it was good enough for their customers. And
Mm-hmm.
because it was so tightly integrated into AWS or GCP, that
Mm.
most customers they went with it.
Yeah.
And so, we definitely have some questions as to whether or not those are good venture markets. I mean, and there's
Mm-hmm.
also just lots of open source. There are companies like LineChain that are
Yeah.
trying to build frameworks. It's not clear whether open
Mm.
source will just win in that space.
Mm.
So we aren't spending a lot of time there. I do think, particularly in Europe, given the regulatory environment here, that there
Yeah.
may be a business around compliance in terms of
Mm.
alignment with models,
Yeah.
and you'll be able to audit decisions and be able to justify decisions. I do think
Mm.
that could be a venture market like OneTrust was
Mm-hmm.
for GDPR, but it's probably a little bit too early to know how that
Mm-hmm.
regulation is going to play out and where to invest. So long story, we're not spending a lot of time on the infrastructure side of things,
Yeah.
even though you could argue, well, it's going to be an index bet. You don't have to pick which applications are going to win. But there are other reasons why we think there are challenges. So for us, it's really the application layer. And you've obviously got this consumer, it's one category that's sort of horizontal enterprise software, and then there's more vertical, and if it's helpful, we can talk about each of these categories, but we're certainly looking at each of those and investing in all of those, each one of those three types of applications.
That's pretty interesting, really. And when you say applications, so what are some of the examples of the applications that you guys are investing in right now?
Sure. So we have an investment in a company called Parloa, which is for call center automation. And what they do is they provide synthetic voice agents that will answer the phone on the behalf of an insurance company or a bank or utility, retailers, airlines. And they will have an incredibly lucid conversation with the customer. Then we can handle, very significant part of the call volume right off the bat. They train off the training data that they get from the customer that's not available on the web to train from, because they listen to every single conversation historically. And they're able to improve customer satisfaction rates enormously. They're able to obviously reduce waiting time to zero. And
they're using GPT-4 or Claude foundation models, or?
So, we'll get on to talk about this. Our thesis is here that most intelligent founders here are building an architecture that's multi-model. And for a couple of different reasons. One is that there are different tasks, whether it's, that it actually, one model is that maybe performing better than another. There's also a cost performance question around that. And then there's also this flexibility question. What happens if there's a big leapfrog where Claude, comes out and is a far better performing? You want to be able to adopt it. So, they have been using a significant part of the product does use GPT-4, and I think on Tuesday morning, after GPT-4 came out, they'd already gone live with it. I mean, they were
brilliant.
Some of the capabilities of it, they were very, very.
Because that's multimodal, right? Omni was vision as well as audio and stuff.
Yeah, they haven't released the real-time voice capabilities yet, which Parloa actually has their own models that they built around that, but they may well adopt. So they're able to get time to value with their customers so quickly. These are complex environments to build into. You've got relatively conservative brands like an airline or a utility that wants you to, or a bank that you've got to behave in certain boundaries and constraints of safety. And they're able to take on a significant part of the call volume within the first sort of 30, 60 days. It's really impressive. And the customers love the quality, and they get thanked. These AIs get thanked more often than the humans get thanked at the end of the call. You'd be surprised. So that's a good example of an LLM-based application. We also have a company called Coram, Coram, and what they do is they take all the real-time feeds from cameras inside companies, and they help those companies understand what's going on inside their operations in real time. So, for example, from a security perspective, like a school or a hospital or a hotel, warehouse, literally, instead of having someone sitting around watching all these feeds of the cameras, the AI is watching it and will give them alerts if there's an anomaly or something that they need to be aware of. But it also operationally provides insights into how many boxes were loaded onto the back of that truck.
So you can have manufacturing applications and stuff as well.
Yeah, it has all kinds of how many customers came into the store between 9 and 10. Where's that person that just was in the hotel lobby? Where did they go after that? Or when was room 321 cleaned by the housekeeper last? Literally will tell you. You can ask all this stuff in natural language. So it's pretty incredible how good these new models are. And that's built on the open clip model at its core, with a bunch of fine tuning and some training data from the customers. So there's a couple of examples. We have a bunch of others. We have a company in the podcasting category that works with a lot of podcasting and video and YouTube influencers that provide some sort of AI-based editing and tools for video production. So replaces the need to send out a video to a third-party specialist agency that might do a lot of work around the audio and the video, but all that stuff is built into the tooling now, and that's saves on that expensive cost and allows people to be able to produce a lot more video at high quality.
Yeah. So I was listening to Sam Altman speak at Stanford, I think last week, and he was mentioning about like LLM sort of applications. And according to him, if you're like a LLM wrapper, then pretty much he thinks that you're going to go out of business, basically, right? And I mean, he's got his own kind of thinking, and he says basically that the GPT models will sort of improve significantly. So all those kind of wrapper models, wrapper business applications, would go to zero. What's your sort of thinking around applications and moats around LLM based applications as well, right? So what's a sort of good moat? And yeah, how do you kind of go with that situation where the models are improving so much, where you were doing a bit of voice model before in-house, now just with the GPT-4o, you don't need to do that anymore because it's significantly better than what you did before, right? So yeah, I mean, yeah, where do you sort of think along those lines? Yeah.
So there's a lot of different ways to sort of come at that question. It's a very loaded term, but I sort of get it. I mean, I think the first thing to say is that we're still very early in the development of all these applications. When you go back to the 90s, I'm dating myself, but when you think about some of the first applications that came out, they were sort of the obvious, I call first order companies, first order ideas, like content publishing. Let's put, instead of publishing a newspaper, CNET publishes technology news, or iVillage publishes stuff you might have found in a magazine on the web. Okay, that's kind of obvious. Or like B2C e-commerce, let's sell pet supplies online instead of in the store. And that's sort of some of those turned out to be incredibly valuable businesses like Amazon, but some of them not so much, most of them. And then I think the more interesting second order ideas came along, which took advantage of the ubiquity of the web once you had it, and the global connectivity that's been built to support its growth. And you had companies obviously like Facebook, Google, Tencent. So I think there's the obvious stuff, which is like, let's repurpose an existing use case, product idea, and let's just stick it, some AI in it. And then there's like, okay, if we have ability to AI and compute is so ubiquitous and so cheap, what would we build that we just wouldn't have thought of building before? It just wasn't ever possible. So an example is like, if you could afford to have 1 million people walking around your business every day, observing it and telling you how to improve it, what would you do with that information? Like, that's an example that built on that this company Quorum. If you literally can understand every single detail of everything that's going on in your factory, in your warehouse, in your hospital, what would you do with that information? What business would you build? So that's more of a second order idea. And so I do think
interesting.
When you talk about thin wrappers, I do think second order ideas are much more powerful in general, and it's a whole category that not everyone is thinking about, because they're starting with the first order stuff, which again, like call center automation, it's a first order idea. So that's one way of addressing your question. The second way of addressing it is, we have a framework, at least for ourselves. I think I wrote about it, some of this in my blog post. So everyone talks about data sets. Do you have a domain specific data set where you can train and fine tune a model on either scarce or wholly proprietary data? And can that give you a long term advantage? And I do think that is very valid and true. And so we very much look for that. So in the example of this call center company, they are training on millions of hours of calls have been recorded by pick a retailer, pick an airline, listening to all the calls, understanding how the customer service agent tried to resolve that call. You cannot scrape the web to get access to those conversations. It doesn't exist. So that is a unique data set. Now, could you go and license all that? I'm not sure many companies will just allow OpenAI to license that data unless they're actually going to buy a product from them. So I think there's a race that you can get access to this data and build some momentum. It's more of a head start. There's a value exchange with customers where they let you access their data so you can give them value back in the product. But if you can find a data set that's very unique, hard to find,
Mm-hmm.
and that you can use that to fine tune, I do think that's a really important advantage. And there is a data network flywheel, network effect flywheel that you can create, where
Yeah.
obviously the more conversations you listen to, the better your model gets. So that for the next customer that comes along out of the box, they'll get the benefit of that. And so when they compare you with the next company that comes along to try to pitch you, you're just way ahead of them because of this data network effect. How strong is the data network effect? We're all, TBD. Learning, I think sometimes we overestimate them, but I think it's certainly something that we look for. Another area I think is really interesting to think about is we all talk about user experience. How do you create a novel user experience product that truly delights the users? Now, of course, everyone wants to build that. Of course, it seems obvious, but I do think with LLMs, you have the opportunity to create something truly special. And what I mean by that is, first of all, I can think of all these horrible legacy enterprise applications like SAP or Oracle or even Workday. Nobody wants to go and carry out any task in these because they're so over-engineered, they're so complicated to use. You could just have an LLM, tell an LLM to go query Workday, update your vacation hours in there, and not ever have to log into Workday.
The agentic model, basically.
Yeah, the agent. So even something as simple as that creates value. But I would go even further and say, look, an LLM understands the task that you want to do, and in theory, it could just create the interface for you to actually carry out that task, and it could be created on the fly. Okay, and say, okay, you want to do that? Fill out these 4 fields, and then it will come back, and it will actually figure out how to display the answer to you in the right format. It might be a chart, it might be a table of figures, it might be a bunch of text, it could be video, it could be multimodal. So I actually think an LLM, you can completely reimagine what software looks like, which is, it could be completely dynamic based on what the user is actually trying to accomplish. And I think that's the opportunity you have with LLMs, is around the user experience. Now, you don't want to give a user a completely different experience every single time. It will be confusing, but I do think it can you can help the user get to the answer much faster.
And do you think there's something about form factor there that can be sort of transformed? I mean, you had that human pin sort of company that got incredibly bad reviews by some folks, but they're trying that. They're trying that. I think 2 billion or 3 billion parameter models, which sits within the device itself, right, and not in the cloud. And then they're trying different sort of form factors. And obviously, we saw the GPT-4 Omni sort of thing about it's one sort of AI interacting with the other AI. One is voice, and one is vision, right? So, do you think there's something about form factor as well, which can be improved through the LLMs there?
I mean, absolutely. Look, humans communicate in different ways, and often in multiple ways at the same time. So while we're communicating right now, I'm speaking to you, but there's obviously body language, movements, there's energy here. There's no text coming through, but obviously, and depending on the task, there may be the appropriate form factor. So I think voice is going to be hugely important in some of these applications, particularly consumer applications.
Correct. Yeah.
And I'm very excited about that. And I can imagine when we have, glasses or even a chip in our brain that then will allow us to communicate. We'll be talking to it, and it'll be giving us an earpiece, or I don't know what exactly the form factor will be. Some great entrepreneurs will come up with those answers, but yeah, absolutely. Why wouldn't you want to be able to communicate if it's a high fidelity way and a high, high information processing method back and forth, high bandwidth, I suppose.
Yeah.
If it's something that's much more nuanced and requires a bunch of more structured information to be shared, then it's a more complicated query. Like, for example, I'm trying to plan a vacation, and you probably want to consume a lot more information on a screen that you can look at visually. That's going to be a better way to do that. And there'll be enterprise applications, again, if it's more financially oriented. Voice isn't going to be the best way to communicate. So I think it will vary very much, but I think voice is going to play a much bigger role, particularly on the consumer side.
Yeah. I think there are rumors of Apple signing up with OpenAI, and having a sort of like a better version of Siri, right, on Apple applications and stuff like that. So that's quite interesting.
Yeah, I think there's, well, from what I understand, both Gemini and Google and
Yeah,
OpenAI are trying to get that deal.
yeah,
And yeah, you can imagine like, Apple has a phenomenal, in theory, they have the best position of anybody
yeah, for
to
consumer. Yeah,
lead in the consumer AI space,
yeah, yeah,
but they appear to be much further behind.
yeah,
No, yeah, obviously they're a very secretive company. It's hard to know what's going on, but yeah, there'll be a whole bunch of things they'll be able to do on device, and maybe they'll use an open source model like Llama 3 or Mistral
yeah,
Express. But if they need to go to the cloud, which for certain queries will be more
yeah,
complex, then yes, they'll need to partner with an OpenAI or Google.
yeah, yeah. That's pretty interesting, really. And yeah, I'm quite excited about that sort of agentic interfacing. Like, so you have one agent, which is like your travel agent, and the other one is basically, I don't know, your scheduler, your meeting agent, and
Uh-huh.
both are sort of interacting with themselves, and then figuring out where you should go when, and putting that on your schedule and stuff like that. It feels like, at least from a consumer perspective, quite like a radical shift. I think the last time we had was the move to mobile, and these applications like Instagram and like Uber come up. It's been kind of stale, at least very incremental innovation for consumer perspective. I don't know if you'd agree with that, but at least from a layman perspective, I'm just saying, how I've found, the last, say, like 5 to 8 years, right? But it feels like this has a potential of kind of really changing that radically a little bit, right? So which is quite exciting.
I think the consumer landscape over the last 4 or 5 years
Yeah.
hasn't produced a lot of very innovative new applications that have got traction. I think TikTok is probably the biggest success
Yeah.
in that period. If you look at just the overall traction, and prior to that was probably Snap.
Yeah.
There was this Clubhouse moment for a few
Up and
months
down.
that
Yeah.
up and came and went, but
Hmm.
and Shein has become obviously very successful, and
Hmm.
Pinduoduo. But overall, if you look at the venture returns in enterprise versus consumer over the last 10 years, the enterprise dwarfs
Hmm.
consumer, which is a reversal from sort of the previous decade. And I think
Yeah.
I hope that we'll see a whole new generation of consumer applications.
Yeah.
However, I do think consumers as a category to invest in is probably more challenging than enterprise. I think that
Mm.
it's very hit driven inherently. There's going to be lots of questions around retention. I'm sure you signed
Yeah.
up to create your own avatar, create your own selfie photo, and there's
Mm.
dozens of those applications that appeared on the scene.
Mm.
Within days of the API launch of ChatGPT or GPT-4,
Yeah.
and what's the retention like on those products? It kind of sucks. So
Yeah.
a lot of people are willing to try a lot of these things, but how much of these are
Yeah.
truly sustainable? So in those areas, we'll make small early bets that have asymmetric upside, but we
Yeah.
probably won't kind of pile in with a huge check at sort of later kind of on. I think you've got to build a portfolio of those. Those are harder to make.
Yeah, yeah. And briefly, we'll touch on this. So you mentioned that you guys are not really investing in foundational models, right? So what's the sort of, for those who are, I guess, trying to do venture returns to the foundational model. So what really is the thinking there? Because it does seem like the quality is kind of becoming the same of these different foundational models. And it's kind of like a race to the bottom and margin deterioration, right? Basically. So what's happening there?
So here's the way we think about it. Look, we are still early in this
Yeah, yeah,
evolution of this industry, and I wish if we had
yeah,
a crystal ball,
yeah,
how this will play out. But we're in the business of taking risk, and so we have
yeah,
to
for sure. Yeah,
place our bets.
yeah.
So just to caveat, first of all, we did put a very small check into Inflection, which is Mustafa
Oh,
Suleiman's startup
right.
that
Okay.
he sold to
You guys got to
Microsoft.
pay out for that. Yeah.
He's a friend. We've
Yeah.
invested a lot together. We think very highly of him, and so
Yeah.
we're excited to continue our relationship with him.
Hmm.
But, I think he and realized, and I think we look at that space and think, as I said earlier, you're going to need $5-10 billion, maybe $20 billion to compete.
Mm.
A venture fund like ours, we're just going to get diluted down to to zero ownership if we're trying to invest in that type of business. So it's very hard to justify that. And I think the valuations that are being paid, you think about, they're being paid because of the dilution. So you found it, so the founders still own something as well.
Mm-hmm.
Like when you invest in a post money of $1 billion, like you need a $20-30 billion outcome to make the venture returns work for your fund. I mean, that's for us. You want to make 20-30x at least. So is that really possible? I mean, okay, maybe, but there are not going to be many of those. OpenAI is already valued at sort of 80 to 100. So you look at that, and that's challenging. Now, there are different types of foundation models. There's these full stack generalized ones that we've just been discussing, and I think there are very specific foundation models, so like in physics or chemistry or graphic design. Pick a niche area that the training data is truly unique. And you don't want to take an existing model that's been trained on other data like code, because it's just not relevant to the type of use case, and you train it on a very specific data set. So that's a foundation model, but it's not I'd say a kind of a full stack generalized one. And I do think that there are going to be a whole set of use cases where those are relevant, as well as taking an open source model like a Mixtral or a Llama 3 and fine tuning that for use case. So we have been looking at a number of those types of companies, and we're actually quite excited about how powerful they are in solving these problems in these areas.
And that's the sort of argument for that AGI, or general sort of model development, right? In a way that so let's say the ultimate model, the ultimate sort of AGI model, should be able to do those chemistry calculation predictions as well between compounds, because it's like so smart, right? And so like whether that sort of big model, and when you talk about the model, it's not like a one thing, right? It's basically a huge like vector space, and it's got tons of data on every side, and depending on your query, it's just kind of gathering up that, and pulling that in, right? So for me, it's quite interesting to see like how these guys are really pushing the envelope on that generalized model, and OpenAI makes it quite clear that they want to go towards AGI, right? So like, I just wonder what that means for the rest of the kind of smaller model applications and stuff like that we're doing. Yeah.
I think it's TBD as to whether training an enormous model with hundreds of billions of parameters is going to be as good at solving a chemistry problem as a model is just tuned for chemistry and has a lot more chemistry data in it than the big model. So I don't think we know the answer to that. We're seeing incredibly strong performance of smaller models in specialist domains. And I could imagine ultimately a lot of different specialist models. Again, you can have your main model that can also talk to the specialist model and query it. So it doesn't all have to be inside one large model. I think there's a beauty and attraction to that. There's also some downsides to that. I mean, just the cost element to that. So I think what we've seen with OpenAI, at least my view, is they've come out to market quickly. In order to do that, they threw an enormous amount of compute at their model. They built large scale and probably quite inefficiently. And so I think they've been spending a lot more time trying to drive efficiency, make the model probably actually smaller. They've almost set out this belief that bigger is better. It's not clear that bigger is better, because the cost of bigger is actually very high, and the performance might actually not be that higher. Having that you may not get better performance from that incremental size. So I think we're still learning about that. I mean, you saw what with Llama 3's performance, pretty incredible.
Incredible.
So they've
cheaper and free, right? Basically as well.
They've also they've seen huge performance gains by using synthetic data, primarily around code, computer code, to train the model, and that's the reason they've been able, they believe, to deliver on some of this performance improvements at such a small scale. So there's obviously each of these companies is trying to convince you that their direction and their strategy is better than the others. I'm not a world-class ML scientist that will tell you that one is right or wrong, and even if you put them all in front of me, they all disagree anyway. So
That's true.
It's very interesting. But as investors, we got to be able to listen, digest, and make some bets. And like ultimately, we've decided we don't want to bet on a model. We'd actually much rather have retained flexibility and make sure the founders are doing that at the application layer. I mean, you can retain that flexibility. It's not free because you do have to align your model. If you're choosing a different model, it does take some time to align it with the product.
Yeah. And it might be possible that the future might have 3 or 4 leading horses, just like you have Android. People have a preference for that, and people have preference for Apple and iOS. That also sort of exists, right?
Sure.
And both are quite big, and people, it's just personal preference, right? So you might have a feature where there is these maybe top 5, top 6, top 3, top 2 models, and it's just a case of preference of the founders, basically, or people in general, right?
I think that's right. I mean, ultimately, these models are now in roughly, when you see the new versions that are coming out, they're all staying within 10, 20, 30% of each other, and one leapfrogs one and the next one and the next one. I think it's not clear that when the breakout will come. Will there be another breakout into a whole different sort of exponent of performance? If they're all within a reasonable band, then why not?
Yeah.
But I think what's exciting is if you're building applications that you've got incredible competition happening in the model layer, and so you can just take advantage of that. And who's going to win all of this? NVIDIA, hyperscalers, and the users. Not sure the people who are putting all the capital into these models are going to be the ones that capture all the value.
Just from my understanding, when you say hyperscalers, who do you mean? The foundation model builders, or?
No, I mean the GCP, AWS, Azure.
Okay, cool.
Yeah, the cloud. Sorry, I call them hyperscalers. It's an industry term. But there's a lot of round trip investing going on. So when Microsoft puts $10 billion into OpenAI, and OpenAI then runs their models on Azure, Microsoft's earning a lot more than $10 billion back on that. So how do you think about that? We used to have that back in the .com days of media companies that would basically get equity in startups for advertising them in their properties. So it's you can't really compare or you see as clean a view of the value creation here. And NVIDIA is putting a huge amount of money into different, Anthropic, and they just put money into Wave, the self-driving company in Cambridge. But they're buying all the NVIDIA chips, so that money goes in, it comes back.
That's quite symbiotic sort of relationship. So did you say that you yourself and your partners are not really looking at the hardware layer, investing in that?
Hardware, I think it's called hardware for a reason. It's hard. It's in the word. And if you look back over the history of semiconductor silicon investing, it's littered with a lot of dead bodies. There are not many venture firms that have been successful, and there's a few different reasons for that. Number one, obviously a lot of upfront capex. It's a very cyclical industry. You often see a huge shortage, and then everyone builds capacity, and then there's a huge glut, and prices drop, and then there's a shortage again, and then it's the same cycle. So it's very cyclical, which it makes it challenging. Just look at Samsung's earnings or some of these other companies that sell a lot of memory chips or DRAM. So I think it's not straightforward for the industry. It's capital intensive. So for venture investors, it's not easy to get into. And you can just be in the design space, like an ARM, for example. But generally, as a small venture fund, it's a harder space to invest in, and obviously NVIDIA has a huge head start. There's Grok out there as a challenger. I don't know, but we're also not experts in silicon, so we don't have any right to be investing in that space.
No, that makes sense. One sort of moat you mentioned was basically the training data, right? And the data that you have, which is proprietary to that specific use case. So there are some issues currently in the zeitgeist around copyright protections of training data, right? And how you use it. And I think the CTO of OpenAI was asked, like, hey, do you use YouTube to train your models? And she sort of acted like she didn't know the answer, right? So there's, and then OpenAI has been going out and doing deals with specific folks,
Sure.
right? To do that. So where do you think this sort of goes to in terms of copyright protections on your data itself, which is even available publicly, but it's in your platform? Like, yeah. So any sort of predictions on like where it should go towards, or any ideas on what should be like, the right.
Look, it's a great
Yeah.
question,
Yeah.
and I sort of the analog I try to use is if you went down to the library, your local library, and you
Yeah.
read every book in that library in the next 12 months, and then you
Yeah.
wrote a new book that was inspired by the ideas you had from those reading those 1,000
Yeah.
books that you
Is
read.
it derivative work or not? Right.
Yeah,
That's the
as a
question.
derivative. I mean, or obviously so that's one end of the spectrum. The other end is, oh yeah, in a second I just read every book in the universe in
Mm.
my computer, and I created a new book out of that. What's the difference? Well, see, there's one is a incredibly powerful machine. One is a human doing all of that. And
Mm.
so, is that really different? I think it's a really challenging question,
Mm.
and I do think what matters is how what the output is of the model
Yeah.
and how it's described, and like, are you able to say this piece of music sounds like Taylor Swift,
Yeah.
which
Yeah.
is
Yeah.
obviously
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
one thing, or has elements of however you might describe the style of take
Mm.
some words of a musician, a folksy, or there's different ways to describe it. If you really are trying to create a Taylor Swift track, then yes, absolutely, there's copyright issues
Mm.
around that. If you're trying to create something that has a certain tone, a certain background music, a certain lilt then
Mm.
I think that it's very gray.
Mm.
Whether, and the same with is this an artist that's is this do a new piece of Keith Haring, or is it
Mm.
give me something from the 80s that is inspired by the, I don't know, HIV
Mm.
epidemic or whatever it is. So I think there's a lot of grayness in there.
Mm.
I would love to obviously see these foundation models disclose
Yeah.
their training data. I mean, as a consumer, but at the same time, I appreciate from a business perspective why they would be um, cautious, because obviously then the competitors can all know, okay, you use this piece of data. Oh, I haven't thought of using that. Maybe I should
Mm.
also train with that. That could improve my model.
Mm.
And then you're going to have a lot of synthetic data
Mm.
that's going to start be used. It's already being used in scale, as we
Yeah.
heard from Zuckerberg when he talked about
Yeah.
Llama 3. You're going to see huge amounts of that, and that synthetic data is going to be generated by having looked at a lot of the existing data. And so how do you then separate that out? It's going to become really thorny and challenging. And I don't, if you're in the area of sort of creativity and artists' work, I think it's much more important.
Yeah.
If you're in the area of how do I give the customer, how do I solve their problem right now and help them do a return for their order, I don't think you have to worry about it. So,
Mm.
am I diving into some of these AI music applications right now? I would
Mm.
say no, because I do have some concerns that
Mm.
a lot of them are trained on existing works.
Interesting.
That is a real challenge, or anything that's any other form of that creative art. So most of what we're spending time on is these more enterprise applications, and yes, in the creative space,
Yeah.
it'll get figured out. But yeah,
Yeah.
I've been looking at some people working on the kind of graphic design space, generating new logos for companies or new artwork, and there's all kinds of questions
Yeah.
again around previous works. So lots to think about.
Yeah.
And I do think founders should be as transparent as possible about what they're doing.
Yeah.
And
I guess just like everything else, the legal sort of innovations will sort of follow the technical innovations that come about, right? And as a humanity, we just need to sort of figure those questions out in a lot of ways. Um, Moving swiftly on, I want to touch on. So it seems like that Gen AI has the ability to bring down the cost of building applications, right?
yes.
Just like we talked about the AWS and how that sort of changed. What do you think that will have an effect basically on the tech venture investment model? Like, will it go from the Fortune 500 companies to Fortune 5 million companies, where like lots and lots more smaller one person firms are being created? And that's possible because of these different agents that come about as well. So I was just sort of wondering, and like, if I can quickly share my screen and show for the listeners as well, which is quite an interesting graph I found. So I don't know if you saw this before,
I did,
for
yes.
whoever's listening in. So it shows like the workers needed for an S&P 500 company to generate 1 million in revenue. So in the 1990s, it was like, more than 7 basically. And now it's less than 2. I don't know what the y-axis is, like 100 or 1,000 or something. But it's quite interesting how how steep that curve is. And I mean, to me, it's just quite interesting of what do you think that effect is going to have on tech and venture, basically?
Yeah, it's very interesting. I had this debate, actually, this exact discussion with Reid Hoffman a few weeks ago, and
Mm,
I think both of us came out in the same place, which was like most companies are in a competitive environment.
yeah,
If you could save, you know, your entire marketing department
yeah,
because you've got some creative tool, would you hire no mar? Would you just eliminate your whole marketing department, or your competitor who, because your competitor down the street, instead of getting rid of their entire marketing department, their marketing team would be doing all these higher value added
yeah,
tasks instead on top of all these really cool tools? The answer is, yeah, you're going to keep all these people and you're just going to do more. You're going to sell
mm,
more. You're going to market more. You're going to
yeah,
do more.
mm,
In most competitive markets, it's unlikely that people just bank the cost savings and then shrink their companies and be
mm.
happy with the same level of business that they have today.
So they want to generate more revenue. Is that what you're saying, basically?
Yeah, I think every
Yeah,
business is going to want to continue to grow and improve and create opportunities for its
yeah.
people. But I also don't think most of these tools are going to, like, truly eliminating a human being.
For
It's not
now.
straightforward
Yeah,
for now, for
yeah,
5 years, 10 years from now. I mean, I do think most of
mm,
this AI is really augmenting intelligence. It's not,
mm,
replacing
mm,
humans. I mean, I think about it in terms of tasks. Yes, I can identify 20 tasks, or maybe if you break a human's job into 1,000 tasks or whatever, 500 tasks, X number of those tasks the machine can do, but they're still, like, these things don't reason. They don't, and they can't understand the physical world. So there's a
mm.
whole bunch of limitations that eventually AGI, whatever that means, we can talk about that. Will it be able to do all these things? Maybe, but even then, I don't think. I mean, humans are
Yeah,
very intelligent beings too, and I don't think that we're going to see everything shrink. What I
yeah.
do think is there's going to be a whole explosion of companies that will be, I call them business in a box. Like,
Yeah.
you want to go build a marketing agency?
Hmm.
Click here. Here's all the tools to do it. You don't need to hire anyone else.
Correct. Yeah.
We've got them, here's an agent that does this part, it creates your logo, and there's another agent who will build your website. Here's another agent who will do your marketing. Here's another
Hmm.
agent that will send your customer updates on all the projects you're doing. So I can imagine a lot of solo entrepreneurs, or even small numbers of
Correct. Yeah.
people, that could start building businesses that they never thought possible before, could imagine. They dreamed of doing these things. So I'm excited about the potential for that, out of the box, to be able to start a business, run a business in all kinds of areas.
Hmm.
And they'll all add value. I do think this is always going to be an important to have a human touch
Hmm.
with these businesses. A lot of them might be service businesses, but like agencies like
Yeah.
businesses. But I'm quite excited for the potential, because it's such a decentralized technology that so many people could take advantage of it and
Yeah.
actually start a business.
Yeah, if I can play the devil's advocate here, just a counterpoint to what you made.
Sure.
So it's kind of already happening in terms of, like you mentioned about the call center company that you invested in, right? Um, and I was seeing, I think, figures from Klarna who released how it's kind of working for them. I think 2/3 of their agents are basically now like LLM based, and it's working the same job as 700 in real people agents basically, right? And they're quite happy with that, right? So a lot of the BPO or business process outsourcing companies, these call centers in India and
Sure.
other places in the
Sure.
world, now I don't know if the jobs are moving towards somewhere else. Maybe it is basically, right? But that's an example of, at least in the short term, where directly that sort of layer of jobs is basically affected, right?
Sure. Well, first of all, I'll give you a funny anecdote. I
Yeah,
laughed. But I was with Max Levchin, who's the founder of a firm, a
yeah,
few weeks ago, and I asked him about this. He's like, "Yeah, we were doing that. We did that 3 years ago. I mean, it's great that they're finally kind of getting their customer service,
yeah.
organization together, but like
Hmm.
none of that stuff is like really new or novel. And who knows if I think they were looking for some good news.
I see.
The substantive point on this is there are already a whole series, like we talk about first order ideas. There's a whole
Yeah,
series of human roles that have already been automated, or I
sure. Yeah.
mean they've been structured and already outsourced. So there's you can go through the list of BPO categories, and we've done that as a
Mm,
firm. We've gone and we've talked to companies that are operating in each of those areas. I do think absolutely they're going to go and take on many of those tasks. I'm not
mm,
disagreeing with you that there will be a whole series of
yeah.
roles, and that's the first wave where that's already been automated.
Hmm.
But does that mean that every like for example, like most marketing roles, there's not many of those have been outsourced today. Are there parts of those roles that you could automate? Absolutely. But
Hmm.
I think my point is that we're not yet at the point where most roles can be that. Then there's still quite a lot of
For sure. Yeah.
understanding and cognition and reasoning required in elements of these roles.
Mm,
Could I imagine? I think one of the hard parts is like the whole change management around, like every time a new model is released and it
yeah.
has a new capability, do you reorganize your entire company because you can then
Mm,
take away these jobs or restructure everyone's jobs such that you can take all the tasks that can now be automated away from
yeah.
these people and change. Every year you're changing people's jobs, or every 6 months, like
Hmm.
redefining what they do. I think
Mm,
that's quite challenging from a human perspective, but I do think it's a problem organizations are going to have, and
yeah.
they'll need a transformation officer that's not just a digital transformation; it's truly kind of the AI
Yeah.
change management that they'll need.
Hmm.
And so, obviously, yes, what do these people do? Yeah, it's a big problem for society. There will
Yeah.
be a lot of dislocation. And yes, I think we'll see job losses before we'll see job creation. But I don't see wholesale dislocation, because I do think
Mm,
there's many things, many roles that like the AI won't be able to take over entirely. So
mm.
I think this is a really interesting question: what happens in that sort of period of transition, which could be 20, 30, 50 years.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And I hope the transition is long enough for people to actually, be comfortable and catch up with that transition, right? Because the problem is that the transition happens in 5 years instead of 50, right? Which is going to be quite a social dislocation for a lot of people, in society.
Yeah, I don't think it's going to happen in 5 years. And I'm
Mm,
excited about the potential for humans to leverage technology to
for
make
sure.
their
Yeah.
jobs even more interesting than ever before. I'm more of an optimist, and positivist on that front. So I
Yeah.
look at opportunities for that to take place.
Yeah, that makes sense. That makes sense. How are we doing in terms of time? You have to go in 15 minutes. Is that correct?
I think so. Yes, yes, indeed.
Okay, cool. No worries. We're almost coming towards the end. I do want to cover a little bit. So we touched on this, how when you guys started, it was very Europe focused, right? So you're seeing
Sure.
opportunities in Europe. Um, where do you think Europe is today in terms of technology and how things are going? There's this interesting sort of meme that I was seeing the other day that America innovates, China kind of copies, and Europe regulates, right? So, like, what's your sort of perspective on Europe? Are you quite bullish? And yeah, what are you seeing right now?
I think, look, the if you talk to a young person graduating from college today in Europe,
Yeah.
20 years ago, you said, where do you want to go work? They might have said, I'll go to work at Siemens or
Yeah.
Alcatel and get a job for life. 10 years ago, it might have been, I'm going to go to Goldman and McKinsey.
Yeah. Yeah.
And now they all want to start a company. I mean, so
Mm.
that's incredible. And obviously
Mm.
for me, it brings me joy.
Mm.
So I think, like, from a cultural perspective, startups become much more acceptable. Europe used to be a very conservative culture,
Yeah.
risk of failure,
Mm.
black mark, family will think poorly of me. Now, like,
Yeah.
it's the cool thing to do.
Mm.
That's the first thing I would say. The second is that we have some incredible role models now, founders who've had huge successes, whether, Daniel Ek from Spotify. I mean,
Yeah.
when you have people with that success, you just completely change the level of ambition that you have as a founder. You can look at that. Okay, it is possible. I didn't believe it. Okay, wow. Someone
Yeah.
just created a, $1 trillion company. Oh, wow. I could be that person. They look up to these founders. And so we're
Mm.
seeing that happening in Europe. And
Mm.
look, it takes time, the ecosystem. You have people who come out of these startups and then they go on to fund the next startup as angel investors, or they join the early team, and then those
Mm.
people and those teams go on. So you have
Yeah.
like the PayPal mafia that was Reid Hoffman and
Yeah.
Max Levchin and Peter Thiel and Elon,
Yeah. Yeah.
who was in X.com. And so they've obviously gone on to do amazing things. And you have similar from the alumni of whether it's TransferWise or
Yeah.
Revolut or Spotify. And so I think it takes time. And so I think we are in a great place here.
Mm-hmm.
I think the third thing I would say is that, like, from a pure machine learning talent, we have as many machine learning masters and PhD graduates every year than the
Mm-hmm.
US does. And coming from some of the, we have some of the top universities in the world in those areas: Cambridge, Oxford,
Yeah.
Imperial,
Yeah.
ETH, the compounding techniques. So the talent base. And then the fourth thing is, because of DeepMind been built in London, you have enormous amount of, obviously, research talent in
Mm.
DeepMind, and then you've seen all the other AI labs that have been built in London because
Yeah.
that's where the talent is. So
Mm.
I think there's an incredibly rich base of talent here, which gives me a lot of excitement about
Yeah.
building machine learning based software companies. So that we have all the raw materials now. Some people complain we don't have enough capital. I don't think that's an issue. There's
Oh yeah. You
an
think
unlimited
they're?
amount of capital. Well,
Mm.
you've seen lots of US firms that have set up in
Yeah.
the market in
They
recent
have.
years.
Yeah.
They're obviously believe in it, and
Mm.
people get on planes all day long when something is exciting. So
Yeah.
I think capital is very mobile.
Yeah.
The early stage where we play, you have to be hands on and active, and I think there's plenty of capital at early stage, and for the
Mm.
scale up growth stage, I don't think there's been a shortage
Mm.
at all. So I'm pretty bullish for all those reasons. We, culturally, the entrepreneurs here aren't quite as aggressive, not quite as
Mm.
bold. They don't make claims that they haven't achieved yet, like you might find in Silicon Valley. So
Yeah.
I do think that holds people back here in their companies. They're not as good at pitching and fundraising
Yeah.
generally. I'd say they're
Yeah.
just not as, slick and confident
Yeah.
in general. So it's important. You need to be a great storyteller
Yeah.
as a founder, not only to raise money, but also to hire great people
Yeah.
on your team and to obviously to win over customers. So I think the whole storytelling talent in Europe, we could do with, better
Yeah.
schooling around that.
Yeah. Yeah.
But I think we have a lot of the right raw materials here and technical talent. So
Yeah.
that gives me a lot of hope.
And do you see, so a lot of sort of AI regulation stuff that's going on, and Europe is, again, leading the forefront, just like it did for GDPR and other stuff. There's the UK AI Safety Institute. I think they released this open source regulatory tool for foundational
Sure.
models. I don't know if you saw that. So where do you think, firstly, I guess, where do you stand on regulation of AI, basically, and which parts do you think we should regulate or not? And then we'll come to Europe, basically, and what it's doing. Yeah.
Okay, we don't know how long we have to answer that question. So I'm on the board
Yeah.
of Entrepreneur First, EF. So Matt Clifford's
Yeah.
one of the
Yeah.
founders here, and he helped set up the AI Safety Summit in
Yeah. Yeah.
November.
Correct.
And
Yeah.
Ian Hogarth is now running the AI Safety Institute.
Yeah.
So I know both of them and being close to that effort. I do think it's incredibly important. I think what they've done is
Mm,
truly amazing in terms of galvanizing the world and the key stakeholders, both not just in the UK, but across Europe and in the US, and even getting China to attend that event was
yeah.
a big deal. So I do think what they're doing is they're getting all the large model providers that have these multi-billion, tens of billions of parameter models to
Yeah.
agree that they will take certain steps before they release a new model into the wild. And I think that is appropriate. I think those models, the power of those models, I do think that's a lot of responsibility that they
Yeah.
have. Um, so I think that's probably where the regulations should sit, because the models are really the kind of the key
Yeah.
and the core to ultimately what's possible. I am very cautious about regulation generally, because I think my experience of regulation historically is that it shows up usually, often too late, and it's probably too late now. They make all the wrong decisions because they don't understand the technology, they don't understand where things are heading. And in this particular case, I do think the people working at the AI Safety Institute are
Yeah.
some of the best researchers in the industry, but there's so many different people and different agendas. It's very hard to be confident in what they will do.
Mm,
And I also think the technology is still so early in its development that you want to be careful not to
yeah.
constrain what's possible by starting to put constraints on it. So there are some very significant things that are risks here, and the staff are in that book
Yeah.
behind me, The Coming Wave.
Yeah.
He outlines a lot of those risks
Yeah.
in very black and white terms, and I think he's right to do so. But I think there's so many, like with any technology, there's lots of things that can be used for good, and also people who have the wrong intentions can use those technologies for bad. And so we have to be thoughtful about that in advance. And so
Yeah.
I'm not suggesting we just allow this to happen to us, but I also think that we have to think about all the benefits that can come
Yeah.
from having an AI tutor in every kid in
Absolutely.
the world, in India, in China,
Yeah.
in Brazil, every kid in the world having their own personalized math teacher or English teacher or science teacher, or every village in the world having unlimited amount of doctors that can help attend to them. I mean, the potential for those types of applications is so great. And I'm very cautious. How do you compare that against the downsides of, yes, allowing this technology out there could be used for something else?
Yeah.
So I think we all have to take it very seriously, but I'm not sure I have complete faith in regulators to make
Yeah.
the right decisions.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. It is quite a fine line, right? And we should not, have knee-jerk reactions to regulation, certainly, and over politicizing, over regulating things before innovation can really take off the ground, right? So that's
Well, but there's a lot of people, the doomers, there's the boomers and the doomers, and the doomers are out there. They're laying out all these things that could happen, and
hmm.
AGI, and they could take over the world, turn us all into paper clips. That's true, maybe, but there's also some incredible set of things that we can do.
Hmm.
We can see today it's possible,
Yeah.
and let's just make sure we don't get in the way of that.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. One interesting thing I think Sam Altman mentioned recently was about regulating the outputs versus the inside of the models and just mucking around with the weights and stuff. So basically, yeah, so there should be a way, if it's a 10B plus parameter model, you can actually, just query the output that's there and see if it can produce a bomb or something like that, basically. And it should have audits on the output and not inside the model itself. So which is quite interesting. I think it's a very like fluid conversation, lots of stuff moving, but yeah, hopefully the kind of entrepreneur first and innovation first camp and school of thought wins, within that space. Yeah.
Absolutely. I think I don't really. It's an interesting way to approach things.
Yeah.
He described. I don't think he's going to want to open up his source code to
Yeah.
everybody.
Exactly.
But we also didn't. We also separately didn't talk about open source. I mean, this stuff is
Yes.
out there
Yes.
already. So
Absolutely.
we
Yeah.
kind of. I do think open source is a good thing.
It's really
I'm not.
catching up, isn't it? Yeah. With the great models. Yeah.
Yes, and so we can't deny that is already out there.
Yeah.
And I actually do think overall net I'm positive around that. So
Yeah.
now they're not quite as big as yet as the open AIs and Anthropics of the world, but
Mm.
it's highly possible they could get there. We've got decentralized compute to
Yeah.
scale. It's out there today
Yeah.
as well to train these models.
The pace of change for me for this wave is just incredible. Like every single week, it's something else is coming up, and especially the open source community with the Hugging Face and stuff like that. It's just like incredible pace, you know. So yeah, it's
Yeah, I'm
totally
not
a
getting as
different
much
wave.
sleep as I did in the .com times when
I
things
can
like
imagine.
you knew what HTTP was, you knew TCP/IP, you knew
Yeah, yeah,
the core
fair.
protocols. They didn't change every week. No, the underlying technology is
Yeah,
it's moving at a pace that it's wild.
it's well, it's well. Brilliant. With that note, we'll leave it at that. We've run out of time. Thank you, Toby, for joining the podcast. What a great pleasure. And yeah, all the best with all those companies you're investing in. Looking forward to a great future.
Thank you, Wahid. I appreciate it, and thank you for having me.
Brilliant.